Commentary I gave NBC later on was limited to a total of 3 hits the weekend I came back. That was it. It was very, very tough for us to even get on TV with what we had to say, good or bad.
Why was that? Let's stop you right there.
Simply because they went south on the war. And basically, their coverage reflected the fact people are getting bored with this.
This is as early as 2005.
2004.
2004.
Look back at the election of 2004, what was not discussed. Things like manpower. Things like, was the war a good idea? Should we continue to fight? If so, for how long? Things which we're talking about now were not even talked about back then. We couldn't even get on. We couldn't get on a bet.
It wasn't the content of what you were saying. It was a lack of interest, which we're seeing today. I mean, every survey shows the amount of time devoted to this war has gone way down.
Every single analyst felt the same thing, whether they work for NBC, CNN, or Fox. We simply were not getting on to talk about our story, good or bad.
Let me add to that just a little bit, too. During that same period, we were also encouraging news organizations to keep reporters in the theater and certainly embedded so that they'd get a lot broader perspective than what they were getting, for the most part, receiving briefings in Baghdad. So it wasn't just analysts and third parties. We were also trying to get news organizations to do the same thing.
What these internal documents show is that this was a fairly sophisticated program. You sent over talking points. You tracked the appearances of analysts on different news channels and networks. Fox's analyst John Garrett told me he always spoke his mind, but there was an email where he sent to Pentagon where he said, please let me know if you have any specific points you want covered or that you would prefer to downplay. Sounds like you were kind of manipulating these folks.
No, certainly what we were trying to do, my colleague here is nodding vigorously, we wanted to present aspects of this coverage that was not being presented elsewhere, and this was a group of people who were naturally more likely to understand some of these aspects, the military operations that were taking place, the kinds of things that were occurring on the ground. It wasn't so much our interest in these people that mattered, it was the news organizations' interest. They were hired by news organizations, and that made them interesting to us by definition.
And to be fair, the Pentagon did not groom the warheads. The warheads were created by the networks, not the Pentagon. Now, that said, did they have their point of view? Yes, they did. Did we have among the warheads guys who were true believers? Yes, we did. But we also had Barry McCaffrey, Wes Clark, a number of us, including myself, who said, you know what, Mr. Rumsfeld, the troop situation here is bad. We're light on the ground, and that's going to hurt us. And over time, we were proven right. Over time,
how early did you say that? When you look back at the run-up to the Iraq War, do you wish you had been more skeptical?
I would remind you of how Vice President Cheney himself talked as the invasion was proceeding. He said, well, we have military officers embedded in TV studios. That was directly meant as a slam at all of us. So don't, please
He thought the Vice President thought you were on the team. Did you ever feel like you were on the team?
I felt I was representing NBC News and myself. That was it. I was not paid to represent the administration. I was paid to say what I thought, not what they thought.
All right. Part of the controversy stemming from this particular article has to do with military analysts, former military officers, who also either worked for defense contractors or were seeking military contracts themselves, thereby commenting on the very institution that they also hope to get some funding from. You involved in that field?
Never once, ever. I'm poor but honest, let's put it that way. And none of the guys apparently who were in the room with me ever thought to offer me a job. If they had, I probably would have taken it, but they didn't.
Do you think it was a conflict of interest for some of your fellow former officers to do
I
that kind of
absolutely
business?
do, because the reason why you're there is to offer the public, for whatever the reason you have, however good you are, whatever your opinion matters. It is an honest opinion. You offer that without any hope of remuneration, without any hope of reward. That's basically the reward you're getting is what CNN, Fox, or NBC News pays you to be there. That's it.
Fox analyst Tim Eads was quoted as saying that when he talked about the war or terrorism on television, he held his tongue for fear that, quote, some four-star could call up and say, kill that contract. He was involved in military contracting. Was that a unspoken threat?
I don't think so. I also don't think it's at all fair to most of these analysts, who, several of whom were retired 3- and 4-star officers. These are people who were, in many cases, confirmed by the United States Senate, appointed by the President, who certainly understand where the lines are when it comes to individual ethics. And I think to broadly characterize this as a class of people who were trying to do this out of self-interest is enormously unfair to people who believed in what they were doing. And you know, we often brought in former secretaries of state for the Secretary and other leaders to talk with, former secretaries of defense. important retired diplomats and general officers on other bases. We didn't check what boards they sat on. We brought them in because they were important, influential people who deserved sort of some additional information.
I talked to retired Colonel Bill Cowan, who was a Fox military analyst. He said that 3 years ago, after he criticized the war effort on the O'Reilly factor, he was booted off the group, wasn't never invited to another briefing, never got another telephone call, never got another email. So it's